that would be a fun way to get started, because I did have like a 6-hour drive from Chicago, so my hands are still kind of like around the steering wheel flying, because I didn't get in until about 4, and then I took a little nap, and then I woke up about 6 and took a shower, because I looked at myself in the mirror. I was like, uh-oh, I can't show up like this. So tried to look presentable for everybody, trying my best. That's a song that I'm calling Blues for Vansky in honor of the late great Chicago saxophonist Von Freeman, who I used to get to play with a lot, and he was a big mentor to me. And we recorded a CD together for Delmark Records already about 15 years ago, because it was like 98 or 99, so time is going by very quickly, which is kind of freaky. But and that's on a new CD that I have coming out at the beginning of next year called Old Skool, which is some standards and stuff like that. I have a few early advanced copies I brought with me today, but I haven't done a standards type album for a long time, so I thought it was about time, and it would be fun. I thought it was extra good too to start off with the blues, because I tried to throw in a handful of different scales that we might touch on and talk about as the concert clinic progresses. What scale is this one? It's got a very definitive sound. Who knows what type of scale that is? Oh, I mean, yes, it definitely could be used over a dominant 7. I mean, it could be used over a major 7 too. It's a diminished scale. And I actually got signed last week by Hal Leonard, a book publisher, to do a series of educational saxophone books. And this is one thing that I like talking about. When you see like scales written on in a book, music, whatever, a lot of times people like to play the diminished scale, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. I always like, for resolution purposes, to play whole step, half step if I'm going to play it in scale form. Because you have a nice 7/3 resolution. So if we were going to, say, if we were in D7 and going to G, the second to the last note, C, then a half step down, it goes 7th to the 3rd, D7, G major. So it's hard to mess up, especially if it's like 3 or 4 in the morning and you've had a couple martinis. You still won't mess up if you have that scale really nailed and under your fingers too. So we'll maybe talk about some more scales a little bit later, but I thought it was fun to start with the blues. I think next we'll do a song of mine that was actually, I guess, I would be willing to call it a hit record, because it sold great pretty much everywhere in the world, and it was on the Billboard charts for 20 straight weeks, and it got used as a sax riff for Jennifer Lopez's song called Get Right, and it's my song Mighty Burner from my CD called Mighty Burner, so we'll do that one now. that so far, like I said, has been my best-selling CD, because it did spend 20 weeks on the Billboard charts. And some people didn't like it because they thought it was a little too funky, and up to that point, this is about 7 years ago I think it came out, I had been mostly known as a straight-ahead player. But then Downbeat magazine called me John Coltrane Energy for the 21st Century. And I appreciated that because even though it's very different, my idea was to take like modal stuff like Coltrane and Miles were doing in the late 50s, early 60s, but make it a little bit more contemporary. And growing up in Chicago, house music was very popular, so the four on the floor and that type of sound and whatnot. So it was fun. And then like Hal Leonard is putting it in the real book as of last week. I signed off on it. So you never know what can become kind of woven into jazz, even though if it didn't start there. And another scale, I guess, to talk about, since we mentioned the diminished scales a few minutes ago, is in that song for the key of tenor sax. It's in C sharp minor. So I a lot of times like to kind of make it a flat 5 sound, and I'll play like in E minor with like a raised 7, or E Dorian with the raised 7. Who here all knows their Dorian scales very well? Who can tell me what an E Dorian scale is? Just shout it out. Or if not, that's cool, because that actually makes me more happy, because I never know what to talk about, and I don't go in with like a script or a syllabus, because you never know who you'll be doing a clinic for. I remember at the IAJE a few years back in Toronto, I mean, I was in front of like 700 like very famous saxophone players, it felt like, you know, so that was one thing. And then I did a clinic in England, and there was like about 400 people there, and surprisingly, even though it was England, and they, you know, kind of the reason why America or the United States speaks English, I guess, but it seemed like nobody there was speaking English, so, or they didn't understand my accent of English, I guess, which is very possible. So, but I had some communication barriers, I would say. This here is the sound that I guess I'm trying to describe. Here's Dorian. And I like starting it on the 3rd like that. That's an E Dorian, even though I'm in C sharp minor. I like doing it off of the 3rd, and then you kind of have a flat 5 in there. But this is what it sounds like the way I was using it with the sharp 7. And like probably all of us can think of all the times Coltrane just that like that tension or release. So I always like playing the sharp 7 over minor stuff. If you land on it, it can sound a little bit odd sometimes. I wouldn't recommend it. But to use as a a tension and release, or who here knows the term like enclosures, or practices those in their working up their improvising vocabulary? Just kind of like this. So then you're having to incorporate that sharp 7 in there, and basically my degree it is in music, and it's actually in classical composition. So I had to study everybody from, you know, Bach's inventions in symphonias, like to modern, you know, composers. Everybody for like 400 years has thrown that in there. It was just really awesome that, you know, Charlie Parker and Coltrane were the ones that brought it to jazz, but it's been going on for a little bit. Let's play Coltrane's Impressions, so I can demonstrate a little bit more.
All right.
trumpet player Randy Brecker.
Oh, that's why.
And when I was signed to Delmark Records, we did a live CD at the Green Mill. And we still play together all the time. We played together last month at the Iridium in New York and had a great time. And I've always loved that song. But it also is a perfect song to demonstrate that raised seventh, but with a minor third sound. I just love that sound. There's something about it. It has a certain push and pull about it. I also like to get my saxophone to the point where I feel it's totally full of air. And I've had a lot of people say, I mean, we're at my favorite, and I've gone on record as saying my favorite saxophone store anywhere. And I had about 2 years ago, a nice feature in the New York Times on me, and also about my saxophone collection, which probably Mark Overton is personally responsible for half of them, I think, over the last almost 20 years. But I also know I had some people at the time, like on that Sax on the Web and some stuff like that, saying like, oh, Frank Catalano only plays Yamahas because they give him saxophones. And it's like, no, because I have all types of, you know, Selmer Mark 6s, Super Balance Actions, King Super 20s. I have all types of great stuff. But I mean, I think the most important thing is how you connect with the saxophone. And to me, if I can't feel like I can fill up the saxophone, or if I feel like it's backing up on me, then I don't like to play it. Because has anybody felt like they're putting air into the saxophone, but the saxophone or the mouthpiece isn't taking the air? And that's a weird feeling. I don't really teach much anymore, believe it or not. Several colleges used to have me as a college professor, which most people won't believe, but I had to stop teaching this because I was too busy traveling, and then people were getting mad at me because I wasn't there and this and that. But trouble likes to find me somehow. But at any rate, I had one student, and I felt horrible. He was always sick. He was always coughing. He was always just sick. And I didn't know why. I could tell he was trying to get a good sound. His sound wasn't bad. It wasn't very big. And he kept insisting on playing on a small, it was a Selmer C-Star, which a lot of people play on, and there's nothing wrong with them. But this guy was actually putting in so much air, and the mouthpiece wasn't taking it. It was like backing up into his sinuses. And I'm like, you cannot do that. You have to have something that's going to work with you. And then he switched to another mouthpiece, and he felt so much more happy. So I can't say what's right for everybody. I use the Jody Jazz mouthpieces, and these were good for me. But I used Gardalas before that. I always needed a setup that takes a lot of air quickly because I like to put a lot of air into the horn. But the most important part of that is how you focus your airstream. Because some people have a lot of air going in the horn, but it's kind of like a bigger, woofier sound, like maybe a Ben Webster. And it's just like a wide airstream. Some people, you know, like Mike Brecker, whatnot, it's very focused, kind of like with the faster stuff, like Impressions, Coltrane, Brecker. I'm kind of like really taking my air and focusing it and shooting it at that way of playing. And granted, I'm doing that more for an effect. I probably wouldn't overdo it like that in a performance, but just for the effect. Everybody, I'd like to try this out. Go put your hand like here, like kind of in your throat area, and sing E. E. Now sing like an O or O. you can feel the shape of your throat changing, right? And I'm putting this in my Hal Leonard book, so nobody go get a book deal before my book. But basically, in my opinion, people focus on embouchure, which is very important, but in my opinion, you should be able to play 12 hours a day for a month straight and never have your embouchure fatigue. Because in my opinion, your lungs and your diaphragm and your airstream should be doing the work, and you should have, between your esophagus, your throat, and your jaw and your mouth area, a airstream that works for you. So it doesn't mean you want to be going E the whole time you're playing, or Ah the whole time you're playing, but I just want to throw out that kind of hint or tip, because everyone needs to figure out what works best for them, and that shape, just like a singer, when they're singing vowels, they have to be very careful. Intonation can do stuff, you know, go sharp, go flat. We have to find out what works best for us. For me personally, I'm somewhere in between those two vowel sounds, because I can tell in a comfortable playing style, my throat is kind of somewhat open but not too much. O, that would be more for like a woofy ballad kind of type sound, which is great. And E, I think, is a little bit more, slightly more nasally, more focused. So it depends on what you want. But if you focus on those airstreams and work out one that's right for you, you should never have that feeling of the air really backing up, unless the mouthpiece is super soft or the saxophone is just a real dud. But for the most part, you should be able to work within your airstream to whatever saxophone. And I had somebody kind of, you know, challenge me on it and just say, well, here, try this mouthpiece, try that mouthpiece. And while I wasn't crazy about my sound on the smaller mouthpieces, I could get it to work by focusing my airstream more. And that's why classical players like smaller mouthpieces, because it's a focused airstream. It's easier to tune, because like on a little bit more open setup, my setup isn't even that open. It's a 7-star. So it's actually kind of, you know, medium sized. But you have a lot of flexibility with the pitch. Like you can really shape the notes. As if you have a smaller mouthpiece, usually the pitch locks, which is better for tuning at first, but it's harder for me to get as much expression as I like out of it. How about, that being said, what if we did a pretty ballad? How about What a Wonderful World? Would that be okay? Cool. F. I was trying to show off as many different sound like colorings and embouchure things without making it seem overboard. But when I was in Tony Bennett's band, I got to, as a teenager, recording this Here's to the Ladies CD. And I guess album, because I think it was an actual album as well as CD. But I'm trying to think, probably I played it with What a Wonderful World with him at least 50 times. And I always try to listen to singers' phrasings. So like I do a few different things. That's just how I hear it. And I know if you're going to read it off of a piece of sheet music, you could probably... And there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel it a certain way. Also, I was really lucky as a teenager when I was first starting out to get the gig with Hammond B3 organ player Charles Erlin. And one of his first saxophone players was Grover Washington. And on several festivals, you know, Grover Washington would come and sit in with us. And so I always really, I think phrasing-wise, Grover Washington was probably my favorite saxophonist for ballads. Because you could play all the straight-ahead stuff, but the ballads were very soulful. And from a phrasing standpoint, I always really had him in my mind. Also, when you get to meet somebody and talk to somebody and kind of like feel their energy and their vibe, it also, certain people that you connect with, it sinks in. And that was special to me. And I only throw that out there because I think it's really important, especially if you're going to play a ballad, to have, before you play it, an idea of how you're going to phrase it. Partially because like the four of us have never played together before. And I have to be a good leader to like let everybody know what's going on, because if I'm being wishy-washy, then maybe Phil will be like, okay, I heard Frank do that half diminished thing, so I'll follow him this time. But then if I don't do it next time, not that it can't be good, but if you haven't played together a bunch of times and you're not used to how somebody phrases stuff and whatnot, I think it's important to be deliberate, but in a very musical way, hopefully, and really have in your head, before you play the song, how you want to phrase it. Because if you don't, like, I can't think of any good singer, from Ella Fitzgerald to Aretha Franklin to whoever, I can't think of any singer, Tony Bennett, that doesn't have, Frank Sinatra, whoever it might be, have their own way of phrasing, and it sells the song, and it hopefully makes it special. And that's another dangerous thing with standards. For a while, I went away from them. My last CD for Columbia Records, Bang, that one was all originals. And then the Mighty Burner CD I mentioned was all originals. And I did one before that called Street Jazz for Warner Brothers that was all originals. So 2001 with Randy Brecker was the last standards one. And just till now did I feel like recording them, because I also feel like unless I can do something really special with them, when you have the Charlie Parker versions, Lester Young version, Dexter Gordon version, it's hard for me to feel like I'm bringing something new to it artistically. So I actually had to take a minute and just kind of lay off of them and not play them, and then let them kind of seep back in my head. And many times, things that maybe I listened to 10 years ago then kind of seeps in like naturally and organically, because if you're playing something all the time, at least for me, it's easy to not necessarily get in a rut, but it's hard to like change things up if you're doing it all the time, unless you say to yourself, I'm going to deliberately change this. Then in a lot of cases, if you're deliberately changing something from up here instead of like here, I'm not usually happy with the results I get. Because it's really hard to say, I'm going to take a beautiful song like What a Wonderful World and play it different, but also retain like the quality and the soulfulness. Different can be, you know, just splashing some paint on the wall. Different can be like, I played in a rock band, Les Claypool's band. I was Ballpark Frank, and that we would wear all types of crazy costumes and other stuff. So there was more of like a shock value different, you know what I mean? But like a true organic, soulful different, that has to come from a a kind of a special place, at least in my opinion. So, who here mostly plays jazz? Who here mostly plays classical? Who here plays something other than those two? Pop, R&B. Okay, cool. I would say no matter the genre, phrasing and style and time are all the key elements to making the performance great. If we were in a saxophone quartet right now, and our time wasn't happening, it'd be a train wreck, right? So time is probably the most, probably the most important thing. Jazz is made up of triplets, right? Everybody hears triplets are kind of the foundation of jazz, or not. Have you not heard that? Maybe it's not true. Maybe somebody told me wrong stuff. It's possible. I think it's important to have a really strong, like, quarter note triplet pulse inside of you to even come close to executing any fast passages, any lines that you're going to be happy with. Who here practices their time on a regular basis? Because it's easy to practice scales, it's easy to practice long tones, because we know what those are. But who here every day or almost every day practices their time? Okay. Who here has a metronome? Okay, good. Who here uses their metronome? A lot of people have them, and there's this much dust on top of them, and you feel good because you have it. So I have the metronome. But my honest opinion is to practice with it, like, religiously for a while. But then after that, it really has to be coming from here instead of following any type of click or predetermined anything. If you get called in the studio and you have to play it to a click track, but you're leaning on the click track, it's not going to go great. So for me, again, playing with Jimmy Smith and Charles Earland as a teenager, that left-hand bass really seeped into my head, which helped, I think, more than anything. But I also used to just go to bed with the metronome on, especially if you have one that you can have like a triplet setting, so it's not tick, 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 but it's like, so it's got some swagger about it. But I practice quarter note triplets. I would say all throughout college, at least once a day, I would just do some type of song or exercise, but in a quarter note triplet way, which would be something like this. As far as pulse-wise, I feel like I'm presenting the pulse I'm looking for by being able to do that. It's easier said than done because, again, it has to be up in your head, and you have to be like feeling it through your body. Otherwise, it's not going to come out. So I would just encourage everybody to keep practicing with the metronome, but really get used to, even if it's just this. Like 2 minutes a day, and just pick a note and but make sure it's locking in with a metronome, and make sure it's locking in with your body. And the best thing, I think, to improve your time is to not have the metronome on. Do something like that with, it used to be a tape recorder. Now I don't know if anybody uses tape recorders anymore. I used to have a little tape recorder with a red button, and I'd hit that, and then the tape would start, and I'd play it, and then I would listen back, and either it was good or it wasn't. But that's a nice way then to maybe like have a metronome going, then you stop it, and you try to internalize the time, and then play for like 30 seconds, and then go back to it and check it with the metronome. Did you speed up? Did you slow down? Are there times where you lost the pulse, or is the pulse always there? And those are things that I think make somebody really grow as far as how they're able to interpret phrases, and is also making sure to have your own internal pulse. I've been working on a recording for 15 years of sax and drums. I have a couple tracks of me and Elvin Jones doing a sax and drums duo. I just had a CD coming out with a longtime Pat Metheny group drummer, Paul Wertico, just me and him, sax and drums. Jimmy Chamberlain from the Smashing Pumpkins, we just started a band together and just finished up our recording. There's a track of just sax and drums. I love playing just sax and drums because it frees me up, it's fun, but if our pulse as the saxophonist isn't solid, it's going to fall apart real quick. Because if there's 3 people to listen to, and now you only have one person, you guys, the 2 people playing have to be pretty together. So, just talking about pulse and time a little bit, because I was recently at a couple conferences where I was listening to clinics, and everyone was talking about like air, embouchure, tone, but nobody was getting into much scale usage things, and nobody was really getting into the importance of time. So I wanted to at least make mention of that. I know we've been playing and I've been blabbing a bit. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or anything they want to throw out to the room here, or me, or yeah?
What album is that Impression song that you just played? What album? Which one of your albums is that on?
It's called Live at the Green Mill, and it's on Delmark Records, and it's me and Randy Brecker. It's Frank Catalano featuring Randy Brecker. But yeah, it's called Live at the Green Mill, and it's a very special album to me, especially because it was done live, meaning you can't go back and fix anything or change anything. I personally enjoy playing live better than in the studio, but that's just me. But yeah.
What's your tip on reading music?
That's a really good question. When I started playing, I was more of a by-ear player. I was not a very good sight reader. So this I feel like I can speak about pretty seriously, because I remember getting hired to play with Louie Bellson. It was a small group. It was in Elgin, Illinois, and then he had his jazz festival, the Louie Bellson Jazz Festival in Moline, Illinois. It was in a small group, and I had a good ear, and I knew a lot of tunes. He loved my playing. Then he took me on the road with him in a big band style. I didn't do very good, and he pulled me aside, and he's like, "Frankie," he's like, "but you play so great." He's like, "We gotta get your reading chops up," and I'm like, "I know." And he said to me, he's like, he had a really great drum teacher that taught him to read well, which is how like all the Duke Ellington stuff he was on, and he wrote a lot of songs, Skin Deep and whatnot, that the Duke Ellington Orchestra played, meaning most of the time drummers aren't thought of as like composers and arrangers too. So he was the best person I feel that could have possibly taught me how to read. He didn't talk about notes at all. He dealt only with rhythms, and he made me count out the rhythms. I remember him just giving me seriously, a pair of drumsticks, and he would just make me read the stuff, but not singing it, but like hitting. And then it was like the space, I realized, is what was messing me up. Because if, let's say, you have a quarter note, and then let's say you have a series of 8 notes, I would somehow start cheating the quarter note, or the half note, then I get all excited and I jump into the 8 notes, and by then it was all messed up. So my thinking is most people I know have a pretty good grasp of the notes. Like they know where the notes are in the staff. If not, that's the first thing to get together. But that at least is pretty easy to get together. Even I actually made myself, at the recommendation of a good piano player, little flashcards to start. Because I was already hired for a kind of important gig, and I was subpar in the reading department. So it was either like resign, get fired, or get it together. So I learned clarinet, I learned flute, and I learned to sight read as quickly as I possibly could, because I did not want to go back to Hanover Park, Illinois, embarrassed as a 17-year-old and have my mom say, "See, I told you so." And that's what, my mom did not want me to play saxophone. But so I actually made little flashcards where in the staff, A, say it, B, say it, F, say it. So just, you instantly know where it's at. The rhythms, though, as a saxophone player, were things that messed me up the most, because if you're playing a percussion instrument, you're constantly dealing with rhythms. So the fact that he really made me, you know, count them out, but also with the drumsticks, play them out. That was the best advice anyone gave me. And, or just, you know, clap them, like truly. Is it like an eighth note rest and an eighth note? And then it's, instead of, and then really get used to like knowing where the time is at. It's not, it's no different than ba, 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 ba. So I would say, has anybody tried to really spend a lot of time analyzing rhythms, like maybe even buying like a drum or a percussion or like a timpani book or anything like that? Okay, I definitely think that, and like some basic rudiments on the drumsticks. I have a drum set in my basement that, you know, most people come over rehearsal and, you know, practice and stuff, and I'm a horrible drummer, but I still like to just mess around. So it's just so it's in your body. I say a lot of times, so it's kind of like a part of you. Because if you're having to count too much, there's a good chance you'll probably miss some phrases and some notes and stuff because you're overthinking it. So it has to be get to the point where it's pretty quick and spontaneous and in your body. So I would definitely say, for reading purposes, please count out rhythms and buy like maybe a percussion book that has like some basic, you know, rolls, rhythms. Best thing is there's a lot of like I've seen like Latin rhythms in hand percussion stuff. That is like, if you can sight read all those rhythms, you'll be cool. There'll be no worries, because they sound great. But I mean, once you start getting into like 16th note subdivisions and stuff, it gets a little tricky, and I mean like dotted 16th notes and stuff. So I would suggest that. Also, getting used to, and I didn't really do it till I was in college, and I was having to write a lot of stuff, but getting used to playing in different time signatures. Because as jazz players, my favorite time signature to play in is 4/4. Because swing is based in 4/4 for the most part and whatnot. But if you start counting out other time signatures, you know, 7, 8, whatever, you know, as many as you can go through, it also takes your mind out of like maybe patterns, because that I think was what was also messing me up when I was a younger guy, is that you think something is going to be this rhythm because your eyes aren't far enough ahead in the music. So then you can default to something you think it's going to be and be wrong. So constantly, I would say most solid sight readers are probably actually reading about 2 bars ahead of what they're playing. Because at least 1 bar, because you have to like kind of scan for a pitfall, if that makes sense. If you can keep your eyes moving forward, then you give yourself that split second to adjust for something that might be out of the ordinary or thrown at you. So those are, in a nutshell, those probably 5 or 6 tips are probably the things that I recommend the most. Yeah?
Can you just describe what a typical practice session would be for you?
That's a good question. I used to practice all the time. And I still love practicing. I've always loved practicing. It's never seemed like a chore. But unfortunately, just for like, you know, in a couple days, I'm going to the Middle East to perform. I have this band with Chris Poland from Megadeth called Polecat. We have a little tour starting. So, I mean, when you're on the road, like for example, car, 6 hours, show up, go get some coffee and a little turkey wrap at the coffee shop across the street and whatnot. The time to actually practice is really rough. So I try to squeeze in as much stuff in like a solid, like maybe half-hour practice. The first thing I try to do is make sure my reads are happening. It's a real bummer to get to somewhere. A couple years ago, I played the Park City Jazz Festival, like 10,000 feet up in the air in Utah. None of my reads worked. They were good reads, and they were working great in Chicago. But different humidity, different altitudes, it all changes stuff. So I use the Jazz Select Rico Reeds. I'm really happy with them, but I always make sure that maybe I have a couple that I know I'm going to play that week that I play through a little bit every day. So that's part of it, is just making sure the reeds are cool. I like to have a little bit of scar tissue on my lip so that if I have to play a long time, it doesn't injure my lip. There's all types of stories about great saxophone players injuring themselves, great trumpet players, Freddie Hubbard. A lot of people know the story. You know, he like basically had like a hernia in his lip. It had split on him a little bit from overplaying, but not maybe having enough callus there, like having not kept up the daily regiment or whatnot, then doing a bunch of hard gigs. Now it splits a little bit. That's really dangerous as a saxophone player because you can truly injure yourself. So having a little bit of like just as I'm feeling my lip, it's not like tons of calluses because that would be weird. But my wife would be upset. She'd be like, "What are you doing?" Definitely having enough so that you can play hard and as much as you want, but without injuring yourself. Also, our lips have to be pretty flexible to play, you know, high notes. Maybe we're a little bit more firm here, but lower notes, you can't be like this, you know, on low notes. So I practice a few altissimos. And then all the way down the horn, so I can keep my intonation up and know what each note feels like. I'm listening to the notes, but I'm also knowing how they feel when they resonate into the saxophone in my body. If this note is resonating, I can tell that's sharp. Now I was purposely making it go sharp, but if it's in tune, it should really resonate. And then I can get whatever vibrato I want because it's focused and it's in tune. I hear a lot of players that I really like their playing, but I can tell maybe they haven't practiced or done enough gigs for a week or two because they start losing the center or the focus in the sound. And so I like to make sure to do a little bit of altissimo, and then especially not even long tones as much as the subtones, just to keep the lip supple. And also make sure that I'm happy with the amount of pressure, because it's nice to have a woofy sound with a little bit of air leaking out if you want. But if you use too much pressure, sometimes it messes up the seal of our embouchure on the mouthpiece. It can cause air to leak out. It can cause our pitch to be bad. So lower notes for me are the things that I try to focus on the most. That also goes hand in hand with having a good reed, because if you can get the altissimos out and you can get the low notes out, you should be in good shape. So have people noticed how sometimes some reeds, man, the altissimo is screaming, this is great, but then you go to the low notes and it's balky, and usually that means the reed's too stiff. One tip also is that when you're putting the reed on the mouthpiece, I like to make sure when I push the tip of the reed down, it's perfectly flat and even with the tip of the mouthpiece. Some people like to have it a little bit up, a little bit down. Me, I like it to be perfectly flush so that if I tongue stuff, the reed isn't protruding. That can cause squeaks, that can cause your reed to crack and chip easier. And there's nothing worse than being in the middle of a gig, and maybe during the middle of your solo, and then your reed chips. We've all been there where like maybe the corner chips off or it splits down the middle. It's bad. So having it flush, because it's not usually the reed's fault. A lot of times it's the way our tongue is attacking it or the way that we have the reed positioned. If your reed starts going a little bit soft during a gig and you don't want to put another one on, a little secret or tip that I like is you can like take about 10 seconds, adjust the ligature, bump it up just a smidge, and then tighten it back down, because then it almost acts as if the reed is about like a quarter strength stiffer than it is. You can't overdo it because then it won't seal well, but if your reed starts going soft and you're having pitch or response problems, you can bump the reed up a little bit and it will help. But I guess in a nutshell, I used to go through all the scales every day. I used to go through all that stuff. I try to maybe like a couple times a month just to kind of like keep up on stuff. But in a nutshell, I try to spend about a half hour, of which 10 is about working with reeds and making sure all the reeds are playing good that I want to use for the next week. It's about hitting the low notes. It's about working on the upper notes. And then I usually try to kind of keep myself just like having fun. I usually try to play through a tune or two. Maybe it's one that I'm learning and I don't know yet. Maybe it's one that I haven't played for a long time. Maybe it's just one, we might play this later tonight, but like the other day I was just playing through Our Love Is Here to Stay. There's certain skips in that melody that I know if my lip is too tense, I won't be happy with the sound quality I'm getting on them. And it'll be hard for me to punch some of them. Like even for a little bit in What a Wonderful World, I have a bunch of videos on the Rico Reeds site that talk about split tones and just getting other effects out of the saxophone. I like to be able to pop these notes if I want and just like scream them like that, or be able to same note so if my lip isn't flexible enough and if my airstream isn't maintaining its focus, I won't be able to have that versatility. So I really feel like it's not like any type of overly undoable or secret anything, but playing through a couple melodies, trying to maybe work on or learn a new song, playing the low notes, playing the high notes, and making sure I have reeds that I'll be ready to go for the gig that night or the following week. Because that really, that can really ruin a gig if, again, like the altitude is different. Like really, I was running late from the airport and I was like, uh-oh. So ironically, I opened up a new box of reeds and they played just fine. And I know, like, at least for Rico, they seal, you know, the cellophane on the package doesn't let air in. So ironically, it was the fact that those reeds had like adjusted to whatever altitude, temperature I was at in Chicago, and the fact that they had some moisture and whatnot, whatever happened by the time they got to Park City, they were kind of warping and doing weird things, and they were just really dull. So luckily, I opened up a new box and I was good to go. But yeah, it was I was pretty scared. Another thing, and I learned this the hard way. If you're on the road and you're playing a lot, it's really easy for us to have our saxophone go out of adjustment because it's bouncing around a little bit. Maybe, you know, you catch the B flat key weird, it bends a little bit. So there's all types of stuff because the saxophone has a lot, you know, a lot of keys to it. I would definitely not put off going to, having your saxophone repaired or at least checked out on a regular basis, because there's a lot of stuff like the B flat, the C key. If that starts leaking, we're in trouble. The palm keys, if they start leaking, we're in trouble. If a B, a C, a G, if those keys start leaking, I mean, you can work around them to a slight extent by pushing down a little harder, but like these ones over here, if they're not sealing, which can easily happen, you know, it gets caught on the case a little bit, it can bend like a fraction of a millimeter, just enough so that it's not sealing, and then it might be playable, but you might have like notes that break away here and there, and so just another suggestion, I know it's not part of the practice regimen, but I would say even if you don't think your saxophone has anything wrong with it, if it's been 2 or 3 months, you know, bring it over and have it checked out, because I've noticed if I don't do that, then 3 months turns into 4, and then all of a sudden you're on the gig and something goofy is going on. So that's another not necessarily practice related thing, but just I think just a good thing to do naturally so that you don't get caught off guard on a performance and whatnot. So, any other questions? Yeah.
So how do you get to this lightning speed during the solos? You know, this is like just 50 times as fast as I play.
Well, I don't think I had a specific yes or no X plus Y equals Z situation. I do remember being about 16 or 17, and I wasn't able to play double time passages at all. I was very upset, and because I listened to players that I really like and respect, they're doing it, I couldn't, and I was pretty bummed out. And I was trying to, you know, pull out music, play it faster. Again, set the metronome, play faster. At least for me, and I can only speak for me, but it seems like a lot of people have encountered the same thing I've had. Practicing 16th notes really fast is not the same as being able to switch gears from like double time to regular time or maybe triplets. So it was basically, after doing years of practice, I would say if I started playing saxophone when I was about 7, 17 was 10 years of playing, and I practiced diligently in those 10 years. It wasn't until I really was able to kind of like let myself go and just feel the time like in my body, which is kind of what I was talking about, that triplet pulse thing earlier. I have no problem changing gears. I mean, it really be like if you're driving a stick shift car, boom, and you're off. If you overthink it, you're screwed. It's just my opinion. You'll psych yourself out. I don't know how to describe it. Same thing, you know, like I know, like when there'd be difficult passages. I remember being in like high school jazz band playing, and I knew that there'd be a part that was difficult for me. If I said to myself, okay, here comes the difficult part, I was gonna mess it up. If I just kind of, you know, was kind of in my zone and I played through it, it was always okay. So there's something that it can't be put in on paper, and I don't think it can be totally explained because it's different for everybody. But there comes a point where you feel inside your time is solid enough, because if your time isn't real solid enough, like I was talking about with the metronome, it's almost impossible to switch gears. It'd be as if like your engine bogs out on you when you're switching, or your clutch doesn't release or something. I don't know how to describe it. It has to be really in your mind, really solid, and then kind of like Jedi Knight type, you know, Luke Skywalker type stuff. Truly, you have to just like not think about it and let go. And then I like, to me now it's just like falling off a log. It was really difficult, and I think I made it more difficult at the time because I was really like psyching myself out. But once you feel like your time is good, and I don't mean necessarily metronomic time, I mean like an internal pulse type of time, then you can dictate any tempo you want to play it, and you can switch gears anytime you want, because now you're dictating the tempo from here instead of following the rhythm section, following a metronome, because that's difficult to do double time, because you're already like kind of like one step behind. You're already kind of like trying to feel where you're at with the metronome or the rest of the band. So there's no way that you can just bust out into any type of double time or other stuff. But if you're leading it from here and everything's falling in line because everybody's time is good, then you can really do whatever you want. I wish I could explain it better than that, or except that I can say everybody will be able to play double time once they feel their internal pulse is solid. And the first step to doing that, in my opinion, is starting off with that triplet stuff. It makes your body kind of do this, and it gets in your body and it's in your mind, and then you can switch gears if you want to double time. You can switch gears to half time and really pull it back, like kind of like we did in Impressions. We were playing up tempo, and then we went into halftime thing. You can pretty much do whatever once the pulse is solid. But that's a very good question, and there's not a X plus Y equals Z type answer, unfortunately. But it'll come to everybody for sure once the pulse is solid. Speaking of solid pulse, Let's do Bye Bye Blackbird if that's okay. This definitely plays off of the triplet pulse we were just talking about. that doesn't go as well if you don't have a really great rhythm section. So how about another nice round of applause for Phil? That song to me, Bye Bye Blackbird, is one of my favorite songs of all time. And I used to play that a lot with Von Freeman.
Right.
And we played that together at the Chicago Jazz Festival about 15 years ago. And I did record it on my CD Old Skool that's getting ready to come out. And I dedicated that whole CD to Von Freeman. I went to the Kennedy Center last year to be one of the people that accepted his Jazz Masters Award just before he passed away. He wasn't able to play at the time, but that song definitely means a lot to me, no doubt. Plus, when I was 14, I met Miles Davis through Von Freeman, and I got to sit in with Miles Davis, and I can't tell you how many times I listened to the late 50s version of Miles Davis's version of Bye Bye Blackbird with Cannonball and Coltrane, and just I would say that's like, if you only know 3 tunes, Bye Bye Blackbird should be one of the 3. That's my. I think everybody should know more than 3 tunes. But if you only have 3, if someone said what's your top 3 in your top 3, it would definitely be Bye Bye Blackbird. Speaking of saxophone derived just stuff that I really, really love, I don't think I could do a concert without playing some Stanley Turrentine, because he also was not only a very nice person and influential to me personally, but just all the CTI recordings and everything. So this is Stanley Turrentine's Sugar.
That's it. That's it.
That's
burnt that, Mr. Catalano.
Well, that was an extra fun one for me. So
Yes, sir.
that goes out, if I had
Yes,
a glass
sir.
of wine, that goes out to Stanley Turrentine up in heaven, though. So let's give
Yeah, that's right.
Stanley
That's
Turrentine
right.
the
That's right. That's right.
I always feel very fortunate to have gotten to perform with a lot of people like Stanley Turrentine and have that be a part of me. And I also feel it's extra important when we get to do fun clinics and stuff like this to talk about that because unfortunately, I guess, because I go to a lot of clinics, a lot of stuff is more based like on technical things, which are super important. But I just really feel if the time and the pulse and the heart and all that stuff isn't in there, it gets kind of rough. And I wish more people would talk about it in that nature. Like, meaning to me, some of my favorite saxophone players aren't like technically, you know, super advanced, but they're just awesome and their pulse and their time. So I definitely, if I can like drill anything into anyone's head, as much as the technique and the chops are fun and they are important, the pulse and the time to me is the most important thing that any musician can have.
Right.
So.